Dr. Crespo, if you don't know him, you should. He has many, many, many years of experience on the dependency and delinquency 730 panel, and he's here to give us a little bit of a tutorial on understanding the 730 psychological evaluation.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. If you don't hear me too well, let me know. I have a tendency to speak very softly. My voice doesn't carry well, so if you can't hear me, can you hear me now?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Nice acoustics in here. So yes, I have been around for a long time. I started doing evaluations for this course probably in like 1985 when I got my PhD, and I was working under the tutelage of my office partner, Dr. Nancy Casey-Boyd, who I'm sure some of you probably have seen. Besides the children's court evaluations, which I have now probably safely can say I've done over 3,000 corollary evaluations. Besides those, I've done probably in excess of 500 to 600 juvenile delinquency evaluations, and then I probably have done over 500 child custody evaluations in the family law court. In addition to that, when I was first being trained post-doc, I worked at the Child and Family Guidance Center, at the time known as the San Fernando Valley Child Guidance Clinic. And there was the infamous McMartin case created a whole lot of new cases of child sexual abuse that I worked with in therapy as well as in doing assessments for about 15 years. So other than that, what I can tell you is that I know that there's a panel, and I know there's other people, and I know that the court probably likes to spread the work around so that you don't get somebody's, somebody like me who then becomes too influential in the system, I suppose. So I don't know what my competition is out there, but I know that there is some other Spanish-speaking evaluators, because if you could tell from my accent, I do speak Spanish. I'm a born native Spanish speaker. So that's a little bit of my background. I don't know what the composition of the group is exactly, but obviously you're all working as a defense, on the defense side, and you probably represent exclusively parents. And so the other way in which I come into the system sometimes is I will do private evaluations for your firm, and the way that works is because the evaluation is private, you as a lawyer have an option to include or not to include whatever findings I have in the work that you're going to be doing with the court. Obviously, as a 730 evaluator, I cannot do that. Everything has to go to the court. So the kinds of 730 evaluations that I get are pretty much a reflection of the kinds of cases that you guys see in this court system. Probably the most common evaluations that I do is evaluations of the parents, of a parent's mental health and associated risks, if any, to the child or the children. In doing those evaluations, like any other evaluations, the examiner will review reports, DCFS reports. We'll do an interview, at least one interview. Rarely, for me anyway, it's the case that I will do more than 2 interviews. So people are only expected to come into the office once. Besides the clinical interview, there is psychological testing. Psychological testing is what I'll spend most of my time when I finish this part of what I'm talking about. So anyway, probably the most common kind of case that I see is issues of risk. Now, obviously, when it comes to risk, sometimes the risk is physical abuse, sometimes the risk of concern is sexual abuse, sometimes it's neglect, sometimes it's associated with some risks in the parents' functioning that would have a indirect effect on parenting, things like drug abuse or a pattern of criminal behavior. The other kind of case that at least I see, and it might be because I do a lot of child custody evaluations in family law court, or have done a lot of it, is I do get cases where either the family law court case has spilled over into the children's court because of some allegation of abuse that has arisen, or because in the context of the child custody dispute, there are some concerns that the child is being emotionally abused or abused in some other way. And then those cases do come into the children's court system, and I will do those assessments as well. Once in a while, fairly rare, I will see only the child or the children in the case. So I don't know if it's because of me, my style, my age is not so easy to get up and down from the floor. When you interview little kids, you kind of want to get down to their level, right? But anyway, I tend to see mainly adults at this point. The other kinds of cases that there are that do come in to my office involve so-called bonding studies. I know that's what you guys call it. To me, it's assessment of relationships and benefits and drawbacks associated with those relationships in the child or the children's lives. And then, of course, there are cases in which the bonding study is being done in great part because the court's going to be making a decision about the ultimate issue that comes up for this court, which is adoption, right? And so there's the courtroom, I forget the number, but I believe that it's not even a dependency court procedure that goes on in there, because typically what happens is that a father will disappear from the life of the child, and then the mother will meet some other man. She marries and becomes the father figure to that child and wants to adopt. Apparently, when there's a desire to adopt, the county has to look for the birth father to get assent to the adoption. A lot of times they're not found, and the case goes on. Sometimes they are found, and the father says okay. Sometimes the fathers are found, and the father says no. I've been looking for this child for years, and it's not there. And then there's a big, it's a big deal. And the court does use cemetery evaluations to help sort through the relationships and the issues. And in the end, what it's all about in every case, and that is what is the best interest of the child or the children. So that's the range of cases that I have seen with, like I said, the primary number of the cases being the adults, the parents. Questions, comments? So the evaluation process itself includes, as I've already mentioned, a review of the documents. Sometimes there are certain documents that are not shared with the evaluator for some practical reason, particularly if there's a private evaluation in progress, maybe a prior evaluation that came in and the results were not so positive or something like that. But for the most part, I do get to read quite a bit of documents for every case. And as a matter of fact, I can tell you that very recently I received a stack of documents that were so probably like 9 inches in just page after page of all kinds of stuff that goes all the way back to 2011 from what I can see. And so when I get those cases, I try to get the court to pay me per hour as opposed to pay the flat fee, which is $500 per person. review of documents, clinical interview. Clinical interviews are done in the home, in the office, and then home visits, if they are requested, I will do those. Sometimes I know that it comes up in cross-examination, why didn't you do a home visit? And my answer is because that's not necessarily something that I was trained to do. I'm a psychologist, or in-home or home visitation is not something that was emphasized in my training. Besides, when it gets to be doing a home visit 45 minutes away from wherever I am, and then the thing, it's like, remember this, for $500 per person, at some point it's economics. So, but when I have done home visits, sometimes they can be quite informative, for sure. Sitting in somebody's dining room can be more telling than a lot of the psychological tests that we use. But I rarely do that. Now, probably the main reason that I'm here is because you guys want to hear about psychological testing, right? So let me get into that. The standard in psychology, clinical psychology for assessment is the MMPI, or the Minnesota Multifaceted Personality Inventory, presently in its second version. The MMPI was obviously something that originated in Minnesota, and some people have at times criticized the norm group for that test, being Minnesota farmers for the most part, which may be very different from the kind of people that we are in LA. But the MMPI has been used so many times and has been researched in so many ways, and has been revised in the 1980s to be the MMPI-2, and it is by far the most commonly used psychological test that psychologists and psychiatrists use in custody evaluations and pretty much any kind of evaluation that there is. There are other tests. There is a Rorschach, the ink-block test. The ink-block test is not used as much anymore as it was even 15 years ago. The reason being that it's a very difficult test to score. It takes a lot of training, it takes a lot of experience. It is rare to find something that is crystal clear without having to do all the scoring. I do remember a case, for example, I had, when I was using the Rorschach, what had happened was that a customer came up to some sort of stand, hot dog stand, a taco stand, or something like that, and reported having seen something that just didn't look right, the way that the father of the baby was laying with the baby and things like that. So the police gets called, and the court asked me to see that father. And the question was, did he pose a risk of sexual abuse to the infant? And so I did use the Rorschach in that case, and it was very dramatic because the Rorschach, the ink box, has 10 cards. And normally each card gets like 3 responses, and the responses in terms of what the person perceives in the ink box are scored in lots of different ways. But when it's a sex response, it's pretty clear why you would score like that, because the person sees breast, or vagina, or anything that's related to sex. Well, this person had 10 responses, 1 response for each card, and every response was a sex response. So I had no reason to tell the court anything but that, this guy's got nothing but sex in his mind, and does that mean he poses a risk? Yeah, I would think so. But that's very rare, that something like that would So I don't use the Rorschach anymore. It's time consuming, and in the end, it probably doesn't, I think, add much more to what I can figure out just by talking to the person. There are some other tests that other people use. The personality assessment scales is one of them. But still, the MMPI is number one. So the MMPI is a test of psychopathology primarily, okay? Even though the word personality appears in its title, there are some personality features, there are some personality aspects that the test does probe, but it's primarily a test of psychopathology. And I'm talking about severe psychopathology. Psychotic process, there's some aspects of it that could maybe probe psychopathy, so paranoia, depression. And now, the way that the MMPI is scored, typically by a computer, because it's 577 items that are responded to with a, this is true or this is false for the person taking the test. Because there's so many items, and it's the configuration of the items that ultimately leads to something that's interpretable, you need to use a computer. The main advance probably that was made by the people that put together the original MMPI is that they not only wanted to have a test for psychopathology and personality, but they also wanted to know the person's approach to the test. Was it defensive? Was it open? Was it self-critical? You know, and the way they figured this out is that there's some items that are pretty obvious. If you're being examined per court order and you know that the results are going to go to the court, it's in your best interest to put your best foot forward. You know, it's kind of like going out on a date for the first time. You want to put your best foot forward if you want a second date. Now, one of the questions that I was asked as to should you guys be telling your clients how to take the test? And it's like, I don't know, I guess you could, and you could, but I would like if you could say to them, just be yourself, be as honest as you can. Because if you don't, the test is going to pick up on it. And then it's possible that a test could be so defensive in nature that after spending, you can imagine, answering 577 items, true or false, that takes probably, for a person with average reading skills, about an hour and a half. You spend an hour and a half, and then the examiner scores it, spends some more time on it, and money, because it does cost money to have it scored. And it just comes out invalid. It was a big waste of time, right? But, you know, you cannot take away from someone going into a situation like that they do want to put their best foot forward. So I would say to you, then my advice to you is to tell people, take the MMPI and just, you know, answer as honestly as you can. And that's it. Leave it at that. Now, there are some other ways in which the validity of the test is determined besides whether the person approached the test items in an obviously defensive way. Not so much in this system, but in other systems, people do have something in it to actually look bad on the test results. If you have a personal injury case, the claim is in part that you sustain psychological problems, you want to look on the MMPI, you want to look bad, right? Because that's to your advantage in terms of the settlement. The test does also pick up whether the person approached the test in such a way as to look bad or malingered and things like that. It doesn't come up so much in this system, but we should know that that's the case. When it does come up that somebody is trying to present in a negative way on the MMPI, then you have to at least entertain the question is like, why would this person do that? Sometimes the person may be legitimately so distressed that they just have no other way to respond but to tell the examiner through the answers to the questions that they're deeply disturbed, that they're deeply distressed. The test, where are we here? Because I brought you.
Do you want some help getting up?
Okay. Come on, Frank.
It should come up. Let me see.
Yeah. Ah, well done. Okay, so this is only one general score sheet that's available for the MSBI-2. The scales L, F, and K stand for line, for frequency, and K just stands for K. Those are the different kinds of approaches that a person can be deemed to have had in taking the MMPI. So if it's elevated above 65, which is a T-score, you know anything about statistics, T-scores have an average of 50 and standard deviation of 15, so if the score is elevated above one standard elevation, it's considered to be elevated significantly. Then there's scales 1 through 0, 1, 2, 3, and so forth. Again, scales that are elevated above 65 are considered to be significant. Then the pattern of the scores, the pattern of the profile can be said to be a 1-2 profile, meaning that the person scored high on scale 1, scale 2, a 4-9 profile, etc. And those profiles have, through the years of research, been found, be deemed to be associated with certain kinds of psychopathology and certain kinds of personality disorders, for that matter. So that's the way that this is scored. Now, I didn't bring all the other profiles that can be an hour spit out by the computer in the results, but other profiles, all scales, all MMPI measures use the same metric, meaning if it's above 65, then it's significantly elevated, and then you hit the book. That tells you what the different codes are and what the different scales are. Besides that, there's some scales for which this is not true. But there are some scales. Let's take a look at, for instance, scale 2. Scale 2 is the MMPI's main measure, main global measure of depression. But depression has different manifestations, right? And so some people, when they're depressed, what they experience is a lack of motivation to do anything. They can't get out of bed, and they can't even change the channel, the TV remote, etc., because they're just so lacking in energy. But that's not the way some other people present with depression. Some other people's depression presents with, hopelessness thoughts and things like that. So there's a long way to go around it, but a lot of the scales have subscales. And then the subscales are also looked at in terms of whether the scores are significantly elevated or not. If it's over 65 in the subscales, then you got a significant elevation, and then that's something that's interpretable, and I'll get back to that in a moment. Now, one scale that's very interesting, especially in this system, is scale 6. Scale 6 is paranoia, is the name for it. And so when somebody scores above 65, a significant score suggests that the examiner or the person interpreting the test should consider whether this is someone who is truly paranoid or somebody who may be responding to circumstances in such a way that it makes sense for that person to be paranoid. Similar to the idea that when somebody comes in to take a test like this and it's a court-ordered evaluation, It just doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to be completely open and not to defend yourself against the possibility that the test scores may ultimately be used against your interests. So unlike the other scales, scale 6 may be the only scale that you might want to interpret when it is significantly under elevated, right? So if it's below a certain score, 50 will be the average, 15 and above, you're not significantly elevated. But if it's below and it's significantly below, like say 15 P points below, then the likelihood is that the person really is so paranoid that he or she was able to see the obvious nature of the items that would consider the person paranoid, and then simply answer in the opposite direction, not to look paranoid. So, in other words, so if you're really, really paranoid, you can really pick out the items that will show that you're paranoid, and then you go out of your way to make sure that you don't look paranoid, but in the process, you just manage to show that you are paranoid. Right? It's a little bit like catch-22. So that's the MMPI, and that's these scales have the most research of all the other scales in the MMPI. There's some new scales. There's the structure scales. There's the content component scales. Those also have profiles like this that you can store, and then you can look for certain other more specific areas of psychopathology that if the test is valid, then you can make some use for. I didn't mention, but one of the common concerns about risk in this court system is drug abuse and alcohol abuse and the effects that can have on parents, on parenting. Obviously it has an effect on parents, but on parenting. So the MMPI also has scales that look for alcohol abuse potential, has scales that look for more generally substance abuse problems, admitted problems. And so there are certain things, depending on the case, that will call for a review of a specific scale that's not included in the basic scales, which is what you're seeing here. All right, any questions about the MMPI before I move on? Yes?
Is it administered in only English?
Good question. It's actually administered in a variety of languages. Probably the most commonly used, other than English, would be Spanish. And the Spanish translation of the MMPI has an interesting story. Well, maybe it's not interesting to you, but it's interesting to me. Because originally there was a question as to what's the best translation. You know, is it a Puerto Rican translation that's a better translation, or is it a Mexican translation that is a better translation? Because people in different countries do speak in different ways. Do speak Spanish in different ways. I know I was in Argentina once. I couldn't understand those people. But anyway, the Spanish version is the most commonly used. The scores are the same. The one thing that I have found, and there is some literature on this, not a lot, but some, using the Spanish version and using the Spanish version with what's primarily going to be an immigrant population of mothers, scale 5 is very, very frequently elevated. Now, scale 5 is not a true measure of psychopathology. Scale 5 is more of a measure of how well or how poorly a person endorses traditional gender role behaviors to himself or herself. Okay, so what's interesting, I think, is to find that in the population that you guys see and that I have seen, scale 5 is very, very, very often elevated among Spanish-speaking women who take the MMPI, meaning that these are women that are not traditional. They do not feel a need to be or to fit the prescribed gender role. Now, it could be because it's an immigrant population, you know, or maybe that act in itself to immigrate says something about not going with the system, not accepting your passive role, etc. But that is interesting to me that I have found scale 5 very frequently elevated in this population of women. Not true for men.
I've heard that the MMPI, that there are critiques of it being culturally or racially biased. Can you talk a little about that?
Yes, that has been said, especially in regards to African American populations, samples. And it has to do, we'll go back again to scale 6. Okay, there's some controversy about whether scale 6 among African Americans truly is tapping paranoid ideation or behaviors, or is more of a reflection of reality if you're a minority member. But other than that, there's been so much research on the MMPI and the items themselves, when you consider them, pretty much they all have to do with some experience that everybody has at one point or another, okay, or has heard of, you know. I hear voices, true or false. Hopefully nobody in this room has really heard those voices, right? But sometimes people do hear voices that isn't quite necessarily reflective of a psychotic experience in the true sense. So that question actually gets me to talk to you a little bit about there's two major approaches to interpreting the MMPI, and do keep in mind that anybody who's using the MMPI is going to be looking at results, is going to be interpreting it, okay? It's not a test like if you take a blood test and it tells you the level of the sugar in your bloodstream. It's not exact like that. It's not going to have the same precise meaning that if you score over 200 on the sugar test level or under 140, I think it is. You know, it's not like that. Okay, there's going to be some controversy almost always in how the test is interpreted. There are some proponents of using the MMPI only by relying on actuarial data. There are computer scored results that will spit out only stuff that is related to what's being found in the research to be relatively true. So for instance, you will see a very high score, let's say on scale 2, okay, the depression scale. The actuarial interpretation is that maybe 75% of people who score high on this scale will be depressed, okay? Well, that's all fine and good, but except for the fact that 25% is a big error rate, it doesn't help much. My preference, and a lot of people's preference, is to take a look at the results and then consider them in the context of the history of the person and the history of the case. Because then, you know, the material makes more sense to me. You know, if you have had your children removed and you feel that it was unfair, and maybe there is some aspects of it that were not fair, then it kind of makes sense that you'd be depressed, right? That's the context is, I think, always going to be critical. But keep in mind, that's just me. There are other people who prefer the computer method, the actuarial method, because that's going to be more objective, okay? Sometimes if you, as an examiner, use the method that I'm proposing, which is a more clinical approach, then the risk in doing that is, I think the term is cherry picking. You know, you kind of look for confirmatory points in terms of how you're thinking about the case to just validate the way you think. But, you know, that obviously will be ultimately shown to be confirmatory bias. All right, questions? Any other questions about the MMPI? Did I answer your question?
Yeah, he did.
Okay. All right, so remember, the MMPI is something that everybody, almost everybody will use. and that is test of psychopathology. Okay, where am I here? I want to go to the child abuse potential. So, yeah. Okay, so the child abuse potential inventory, or CAPI, pretty much every form that any parent sees says, because anybody who sees a test that mentions child abuse is likely going to wonder why is this being given to me, or get defensive right away if he or she knows why it's being given to her. But anyway, the CAPI is a screening device. It's not ultimately a test that's going to determine whether somebody did or didn't abuse the child. It's also not a test of whether somebody will or will not abuse the child despite the potential word in the title. But what it does do, it does give a picture of someone's approach to the test, okay, which the MMPI had the L scale, which measures a very naive approach to the test in an effort to look good. The CAPI does something similar by using what's called the faking good index. When the faking good index is elevated, then the total score and pretty much everything else is thrown out the window, with some exceptions. I'll talk about that in a moment. So let me see. Can this go up? Anyway, all right. So this is just a measure of how many blanks. If there's too many blanks in the answering of the test, which has I think 140 items, you can't score it, you can't use it. Then you can also take a look at whether the missing responses have to do with the scales, the subscales, or the total scales. And then there's some other validity in this success. The lie scale is kind of like the MMPI. L scale, it measures obvious things that the person is saying he or she disagrees, as applicable to him or her, that are applicable to everybody. I get mad once in a while. It's like if you say you disagree with that, chances are that you're putting your best foot forward. So then there's the random response index. There are some people who have reading problems of various kinds, and if the random response index is elevated, again, the whole thing is thrown out pretty much, because it means that the person was either careless or has reading problems, or who just wasn't motivated to give you an actual good response or an honest response to the items. And then there's inconsistency in responding. So there's, within the 140 items, there are items that are paired according to content. And when there is some disagreement in some of those items, it's not a big deal. But when you get a score that's elevated significantly, and there's random responding evident by the score, then not only is the test invalid, but you have to consider now whether there's something, some kind of a process, psychotic process specifically in the person that keeps him or her from being able to give responses that are consistent across all pairs. All right. The child abuse potential inventory. Let's see.
Which one are you looking for now?
Okay, I need to go down. So those, what I was just talking about is measures of the approach to the child abuse potential inventory. Obviously, the thing that we're most interested in have to do with the total score, which would be the abuse scale, and then the sub-scores or sub-scales for the CAPI. So sort of like with the MMPI, you have the main scale that says scale 2, and then you have sub-scales 1 through 5 for different kinds of depression symptoms. So with the child abuse potential inventory, the abuse scale, there's a cutoff score of 215. When a person scores higher than 215, then the safest interpretation of that is that the person is scoring in a way that's similar to the way that people known to have abused their children physically score. Okay? So now it means that the person has somehow gotten inclusion into a club in which the only members are abusive parents. Not a good club, but anyway, it's also not something that's set in stone. It is possible to get a high score without really being someone who belongs in that club. Now, this is hardly ever something that I find in practice, that somebody scores above the cutoff score for the total score in the child abuse potential inventory. And the answer is probably that even though you would say some of the clients that you might have are not like one of my brothers likes to say, the sharpest cookie in the tool shed. You know, you just don't go in and look bad, right? You want to put your best foot forward. So for that reason, the abuse scale is hardly ever elevated. Yet, the rigidity scale in particular is very useful, because even in many cases where the person's total score is invalidated by the faking good index, the rigidity scale is elevated. And I did bring along the items that actually comprise the rigidity scale, because it does come up so often that what I try to do is to...
It's on the home screen. It's back on the home screen. Sorry.
So what I try to do is that I try to then look at the actual items that the person endorsed within the rigidity subscale to try to figure out how that happened. Okay. So, this scale isn't just about rigid expectations about children. Rigid expectations around children is usually found among parents who have lack of sophistication. Maybe they haven't taken a parenting class, or if they took it, they really didn't integrate much of the material that's in there about normal child development and things like that. But it does also have items, as you can see, that really don't have anything to do with parenting and have to do more about, you know, being very almost obsessive about keeping a clean house. But the ones that do have to do with children, kind of really tells you, you know, this person is, there may be a reason why this person poses a risk to the child. If you think that your home should be always neat, for instance, okay, and you have toddlers around, well, that's going to be a tall order. Children should stay clean. Children should never disobey. I mean, those are so rigid, the kinds of beliefs that the level of risk for some sort of future physical abuse, it seems to be, to me, reasonably of a reasonable concern. There's one item here that I thought was especially interesting. Number 32. My telephone number is unlisted. Of all the items on the child abuse potential inventory, that's probably the one that I get the most questions about, or I get the most no response to, because I think that there's a way that you can actually have your cell phone not listed, but I don't know how to do that really. If anybody knows, come talk to me. I'd like to get rid of all those annoying phone calls that we all get. But yeah, so you know, this tells you a little bit about how old this test is. because this test was originally developed back in the late 70s and late 80s. And I know that because I was one of the original students mentioned in the manual who assisted with the translation from the English version to the Spanish version. That's how long I've been around, since the early 80s. So, I wanted to go back to talk to you then about things that you already know, right? And what I mean by that is that a good evaluation should provide you with a report, whether it's in writing, if it's a court order evaluation, a 730 evaluation, or it's verbally, like in cases where a private evaluation is sought and then the lawyer says to the examiner, I don't want you to write a report until you talk to me about what you're going to say. and I do that. I don't see any reasons not to. And it does often happen in those cases that I'm told, no, don't write the report. So it's almost the kind of thing that when I do go into court to testify about those privately retained cases, I almost want to make the judge realize that just because I was hired by you guys doesn't mean that I'm really a defense expert in the true sense, because it just happens to be my opinion. If my opinion had not been favorable to this case, then chances are I just wouldn't be here, and that nobody would even know other than the client and the lawyer that the evaluation took place, right? So a good evaluation should provide you with a report that makes sense to you, that is logically coherent, that you can see how the conclusions or recommendations have to do with what was said. There isn't this experience of what? He wants to say what? A good evaluation report should be modest, I think, in expressing that this is a clinical perspective and this is one person's perspective. I definitely don't have the perspective that the court has in being able to bring in data that I will never see, including, for instance, everything that goes on in the trial. A good evaluation should be fair. Just because someone has been abusive doesn't have to mean that that person is horrible and that person is never going to be able to parent. In some cases that may be true, and then a good evaluation report will manage a way to say that respectfully. So I think a good evaluation should be clear, a good evaluation should be fair, a good evaluation should integrate all of the material that's included in the report. I think a good evaluation shouldn't go on and on and on forever. Sometimes I do have concerns about some of my reports. We start to get into 25, 30 pages, and it's like, part of me, I kind of figure nobody's going to read this. Yeah, everybody goes straight to the summary section, and that's it, right? Because you don't have the time to look at everything. But if there's a trial coming and all of that, I guess that probably changes things, and you start looking at things.
As an evaluator, if you look at a scale and it's elevated, do you ever go back and look at the specific items and is there any significance in looking at which specific items were the ones that are sort of the outliers or whatever?
Yes, that's a good question. With the MMPI scale 6 I mentioned, the paranoia scale, it is possible to get subscale scores that will classify different categories of paranoia. And some of the items that are in there, when you look at whether the person endorsed that item or not, do have a lot to do with current circumstances, right? So if you're before the court and your child is in foster care, and you got a social worker that you perceive is not in your corner, to say the least, you might endorse certain items that if you endorse them all the time and you endorse them about everybody, then yeah, that makes you paranoid. But in this specific case, if you're really just saying that the social worker is after you, or the county council is after you, then maybe it's reasonable. Maybe it's not paranoid. So that's what I mean about looking at these test results clinically and in context rather than purely actuarially.
So is there actually a conversation with the individual about, so you said that
No.
people are out to get you, why do you think that? Or-
Probably not, because by the time that the what's that?
Is that the first? Is that
That's the
the
latest, yeah.
Can I just hang it up?
Nice. Maybe we can leave it for the contract. Okay, but anyway, the question was, do we review the specific item? You know, if the person is still in the office, and I'm kind of looking at the copy in particular, the MPI is too many questions to really be able to do that, and with the MPI, no single item is ever going to tip the test in one direction or another. With the child abuse potential inventory, unlike the MPI, the person gets a score sheet and answers true and false for every item. When you look at the score sheet, you don't see the test items. With the CAPI, the test item and the response is all in the same piece of paper. So if I see it and I look at something like, you know, my telephone is so listed or something like that, maybe I won't question that. But there's some other items that the person might express agreement or disagreement with that I could ask questions about, but that hardly ever happens.
Does like cultural or family upbringing play any part in the analysis? Like, I'm just looking at the rigidity scale, and maybe some of these items would be endorsed because of the particular either cultural or how they were brought up, and that's
Well, and that's correct, and that's one of the reasons why when you start looking at items as opposed to scores, the conclusion becomes easily controversial and questioned, you know. So, I mean, I guess what I can say here is that maybe the biggest personal benefit to me of being a psychologist is that I've learned over the years to think in as-if terms, okay? And what I mean by that is that I'm willing to entertain conclusions, but also recognize that I could be wrong, and that I'm thinking as if everything that I've analyzed tells me what I need to know to reach my conclusions. But the fact is that oftentimes there are surprises, right? There's things that people don't tell you because they shouldn't tell you, or because they just don't tell you. Or there's been, this is probably more true for kids than the parents, but you know, they've been through so many interviews with the same questions being asked, and then you see, for instance, flat affect. This comes up a lot around sexual abuse cases, sexual abuse investigations. By the time I see those kids, they have been asked questions so often that the fact that they're not showing any emotion while they're talking about it, often indicative of coaching and somebody telling the child what to say and stuff like that. That's not what's going on. What's going on is the kid has answered this question so many times that now it's a rote answer that's coming out, and it's not necessarily indicative of anything in the session. So anything that anybody tells me is like, well, it could be true, or maybe it's not true.
What role do like the reports that you read, the social studies and the social workers report play in coming to your opinions?
Well, a lot, I think, and that's why my practice is that I will peruse those documents before the person actually comes into my office. Very, very rare that I will actually review them, take notes, and put it together in a way that is coherent. And the reason why is that by the time the person comes in, if I know all this stuff that's been said in the social worker's report, I could be so biased that it affects how I interview the person, the questions that I will ask, the follow-up questions that I ask, my attitude towards them, stuff like that. So
Is that the practice? Is that, do you think that most evaluators do the same thing where they don't do a deep dive on the reports prior to?
I don't know, because I don't know for sure. I'm in private practice and I'm very isolated, so I don't really know what people really generally do. But I know my office partner, she often does read the stuff before the people come in. I don't do it mainly for the reason that I told you. I also don't do it because oftentimes I will go through all of that and then the person doesn't show up, or something like that happens. So, I'm just wasting my time. It's really interesting material, but not exactly what I want to do.
Do you, when you're reading those reports, do you presume that the information that's reported in them to be true?
As if. That's my as if answer. It's like, I can proceed thinking that everything is true, okay? That everything that's being said here is true. Or I can proceed as, it's not. And some of it is exaggerated, or some of it is misunderstood, or, some of it is lost in translation, especially in the Spanish-speaking case. I have one case, for instance, I'm talking about lost in translation, where this little girl, she was I think 4, and she was singing and dancing a tune that is a reggaeton tune, and the words were something like "shake your booty," but much more crude than that, okay? And so, through my analysis of the documents, which said, the kid is saying that I think it was an older cousin or something, but I was telling her to shake her booty and rub against him and all that kind of stuff, which is, there's a word for that too, a term, help me, a woman rubs her butt against the guy's leg. What?
Grinding?
No.
Grinding?
Grinding, I don't know. It's like
Work.
Anyway, so it took a while to be able to read all of that and talk to the child and get more specific information about all of that to realize that's what was being said. That she was using the lyrics from the song, she was doing the dancing from what she had seen, and yes, she had done this with that particular alleged perpetrator, but it was all a big misunderstanding and a big confusion. So, do I rely on them? I do, but I typically do that more after I've seen the person. I usually tell the parents when they sit down that is what has happened, that I don't know the details of your case, and I do that deliberately, so I'm not biased. The downside is that somebody will forget to tell me something really big. I had a case like that fairly recently. I didn't notice that the court actually wanted me to talk to the parent about an allegation of her saying that she was going to kill herself and kill the child. Now, the court wants me to address that, and I didn't. I think I kind of look less than competent, maybe. So I had to call because she didn't mention it, and I only saw it in the report. sometimes it's really a delicate thing. In this case, I didn't think it was delicate because I didn't see any suggestions of testing or the interview or anything like that she really was a suicide risk. Presently, I thought that I could do it on the phone, but sometimes the topic is so delicate that, of course, they have to come back the second time. That's almost never decided.
Thank
Okay.
you so much for your time.
You're welcome.